Morning, everybody. How you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. I am Sean Butler. Bugsy Malone's over my shoulder. I hope you're all doing fabulous things with your day. Please do me some favours, guys. Smash the like button for me on the video. If you enjoy the content, it really does help the channel find new people that might also enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And even if you have, can you double check that it's still subscribed? I have asked on the last few videos to double check that because I think YouTube's up to something. 25 people yesterday reached out to me and said that I was subscribed, but I looked again and I wasn't. And 50% of people that watch this content regularly are not subscribed according to the analytics. So I'd ask you all, even if you think you're subscribed, can you double check for me? And if you're not already subscribed, then it's free to do and it helps the channel. So would really appreciate it. Hit the notification bell and drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts on today's topic. Today's topic's all about multi-club ownership. It's a topic that I'm quite invested in. I'm passionate about understanding it because I think it's somewhere that is just going to grow and grow and grow. The rules are loosening rather than tightening around multi-club ownership within the Premier League and within Europe. The FIFA president recently said on the Gary Neville podcast that they were thinking about kind of changing the laws once again. And every time they change the laws or they even ask Premier League teams to vote on potential changes to the laws that until now have been loose anyway, the answers always come back as a rejection of tightening and a agreement in principle to loosen the rules. And you know why that nonsense exists? It's because essentially it's like turkeys voting for Christmas. When you have industries that allow the participants of the industry to determine the rules of the industry, then you're always going to have a situation where the majority will vote in favour of things that benefit and the minority will get more excluded. In most industries in life, if you own a business or if you work for one, chances are that the rules of conduct within the business you operate are decided by independent personnel. The regulators are external. They might be in government or they might be bigger fish within a concept. But ultimately, it's very unlikely that you as a business owner or you who works for a business will have someone within the business that will determine the rules in which that industry is operated. Politics is a perfect example of something which is the other way. In America and in the UK, when politicians have inquiries to determine whether or not they've handled or mishandled the process of going through a certain scenario, ultimately the people that will determine those people's guilt are their own peers, their friends often, because politicians are more often than not these days career politicians, and the idea that the left and the right hate each other within the political sphere is a little bit theatrical. Most of them are friends, most of them have the same benefactors that finance their campaigns, so nothing major ever changes and no one ever really gets in too much trouble, because it's the equivalent of you or I getting charged for a crime and having your friends determine your guilt as a jury. Doesn't happen for the most of us, but the people in higher places, that's the system. And within the Premier League, it's not that dissimilar. The Premier League have a panel, and on decisions like whether or not to tighten or loosen the rules around multi-club ownership, it's the Premier League clubs that vote for what's right. But what's right is determined by what's right for the majority. And in the case of multi-club ownership, you now have a situation where I think there are 13 clubs or 12 clubs within the Premier League that are part of multi-club ownership groups. And that's not just this particular season. Some of the clubs that were in the Premier League last season that got relegated, they are also owned by multi-club ownership groups. Let me just read out some of the teams that are part of multi-club ownership models. Sheffield United, Arsenal, Brentford, Brighton, Crystal Palace, Manchester City, Nottingham Forest, Southampton, West Ham, Leicester, Swansea City, Cardiff, Queen's Park Rangers, Sunderland, Watford, Ipswich, Salford City, Newcastle, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Burnley. And it's interesting when you hear how many of those teams are either in the Premier League or have been recently, that when you find out that when there was a rule or an opportunity to vote yesterday on whether or not to allow clubs within multi-club ownership models to loan players within each other, And in order for the rule to change, to say that that's no longer okay, then 14 votes out of the 20 have to agree to the change. And yesterday only 13 did. And when you realise that there's a majority of teams in the Premier League that are owned by multi-club ownership model, then you know that then rules are never going to change to make it harder for multi-club ownership teams. It's only ever going to get easier whilst the rules are determined by the teams that get to benefit or otherwise from the outcome. So yesterday we have allegedly, according to the Times, these are some of the names of the teams that have rejected or were going to reject the outcome. Chelsea, Newcastle, Forest, City, Everton, Sheffield United and Wolverhampton Wanderers. They are the 7 teams that said no. 13 teams said yes. So in fairness, some of the teams that are part of multi-club ownership models did say that they should change the rules. Maybe that's because when they reflected on their personal benefit in the scenario, it wasn't worth it, and they would rather everybody have to play to the same set of systems, set of requirements. But ultimately, the 7 teams who all said no to the rule change all benefit from it. The most obvious and very near-term example is Newcastle United. For the majority of teams that are owned in multi-club ownership models, the Premier League team is the top of the pyramid, the tip of the spear. And so you could make the argument, at least from an incoming loan perspective, that it's unlikely that most of the teams in the Premier League are going to benefit from being able to bring a player in from someone within their system, as most of the players that play for other teams within the system are probably not of the quality. However, that doesn't mean that there's no benefit. There's a million different benefits for multi-club ownership in regards loaning players out into the system, getting players off the books, keeping them within the same style of football. Sometimes Tottenham face this trouble if you're trying to get everybody to learn Ange ball, and you're loaning players out that are too good for the under-21s but not quite good enough for the first team. Then how do you find a team that's going to teach them something similar to Ange ball when there's very few teams that play that specific system? There's a whole different bunch of benefits in terms of from multi-club ownership stuff, in terms of shared learnings, sharing the cost of back office operations, which ultimately reduces your bottom line number or allows you to increase your bottom line number by reducing your cost structure. We'll go through this. I've got to do a video. I've been promising you for ages the benefits and the costs or the pros and cons of multi-club ownership. But for teams like Newcastle United, there is an absolute 100% benefit to having the system and the rules changed to suit, or allowed to stay the same rather, to suit their system. Newcastle United are owned by the PIF. 5 clubs in Saudi Arabia are owned by the PIF, the Saudi Arabian Investment Fund. And consequently, when so much talent at the top end of the game has moved to Saudi Arabia for big money, they can now move back into the Premier League, and Newcastle United are a perfect example of a team that's probably going to get Ruben Neves on loan in January to cover the loss of Tonali. They would never normally be able to pay for Ruben Neves. They would never normally have the wiggle room within their FFP, but being able to allow the team in Saudi Arabia to cover 90% of the wages means they could bring Ruben Neves into Newcastle United on essentially a pittance of a salary with no transfer fee, and have a player that on his day is one of the best in the world at what he does. Look, it's an absolute disgrace, but I don't see the point in moaning about it, because ultimately, as I said, it's like turkeys voting for Christmas. There's no chance that there will ever be a tightening of these rules around what is fair and reasonable within multi-club ownership benefactors if the people that decide the rules are overwhelmingly people that benefit from loosening the rules in the first place. And so if you can't change it, we can moan all we want, but for me, the obvious answer, which is what I've been calling for ages, and I hope is the long-term plan for Tottenham, is to get on board the multi-club ownership model. All these teams I've just said are part of multi-club ownership. I'm not just talking about the top end. Sunderland, Watford, Ipswich, Salford City, QPR, Cardiff, Swansea, Leicester. They're all benefiting, if not immediately or not in a tangible way yet, intangibly and in ways that you won't see on accounts necessarily, they will be benefiting. Tottenham need to get on board it. ENIC were one of the groundbreakers of this movement. Back in the 90s, they were one of the first teams to do it. They had 4 or 5 teams in Europe. They had Rangers, they had Sparta Prague, AEK Athens, Basel. The rules were not changed to suit multi-club ownership then, they were changed to hurt it. Tottenham never broke the rules. The line just moved over ENIC and forced ENIC to sell. They were one of the groundbreakers, so they know what they're doing in as much as the previous version of MCOs. But in Scott Munn, they've hired a guy who was, I think, the CEO of Citigroup Asia, the managing director of Citigroup Asia. He has first-hand experience at the very best version of multi-club ownership modelling that the world has ever seen. And for what it's worth, for every team that succeeds for multi-club ownership models, there are 10 that have failed. I am going to do the video about it. I've got lots of detail to talk to you about 777 partners, Everton's new owners, the Leipzig model, the Red Bull team. You know, they are examples of teams that have done very well, but there's a plethora of examples of multi-club ownership models that haven't worked. It usually only fails if there's just 2 teams in the system. Once you have the strength to go and get a 3rd or a 4th team, when you start to build it out the way that Citigroup have, then the benefits outweigh the negatives, 3 or 4 times over. But for me, Tottenham need to do it. We've got someone in Scott Munn who understands how it works, who has seen the very best version of it, and the rules are only ever going to change in a direction that's going to loosen the grip and make it more difficult to compete. So if Tottenham are going to make any next additional move to help their revenue structure, to help lower the cost base, to help ultimately create ecosystems where our philosophy can be learned and earned and the value can be disseminated into places around the world, then now's the time. And if not now, then soon. I know we've got a lot of direct issues Tottenham have got to figure out at Tottenham specifically, but we've got the stadium. It's creating lots of money. We have the training ground. We now have a manager that most of us believe in. We are hiring 5 or 6 different directors of football, or directors to, operate and take the strain off of Daniel Levy. We've got the multi-sports arena. Now we just need the multi-football club model to be inserted and hopefully make a success out of it. Now, one of the issues that I'm guessing, or the questions you'll ask, or the issues you'll have, is I'm sure you'll say you're more than happy to see that happen as long as it doesn't detract from what's happening at Tottenham. And all the time, there's always a distraction at Tottenham, and the reason why Tottenham's owners, ENIC, don't put enough money in here, because they're busy doing things elsewhere. And I hear you. But I would hope that ENIC would take the money from external sources like they do for the cinemas and the golf courses. I would hope they would find that money elsewhere and plug that into the ecosystem to go and buy a 2nd division club in Denmark, or a Icelandic operation, or someone in Chile, wherever, whatever. But it's the only thing that I'm sure of, is that the rules around MCOs are going to get easier and easier for those sorts of owners to benefit, and Tottenham are behind the 8 ball now and will continue to be until we get on board it. I'm absolutely certain that Daniel Levy voted against the rules, but if you can't beat them, join them. And I don't think you can beat them right now, because the rules are determined by the people that play the game, and there's more people that are playing the game in the Premier League who benefit from the system than who lose out. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Like, subscribe and comment, and as always, bye-bye.